Welcome back, everybody, for the last session of the day. That's split into two parts. We've got more on making it happen, but making it happen in different settings, followed by summing up from RTPI Chief Executive Victoria Hill. So please stay with us until that. If you've been with us throughout the day, well done on getting this far. If you've joined us later on, you can catch up with the recordings later when they're released. So making it happen in different settings. We've got 3 presentations and hopefully a little bit of time for questions, but they've got a lot of ground to cover, so maybe not an awful lot. We have Martin Elliot, Director of Strategic Planning at Leeds City Council, Jim Miller, Chief Planning Officer at North Ayrshire Council, and Debbie Mackay, Director of Planning in Savills. So we'll get 3 quite different perspectives. Martin, can I ask you to kick us off, please?
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you for having me. I'm really pleased to speak at this afternoon's conference. I hope my voice holds up. I've got a cold, so bear with me. If you see me taking a drink, please don't think I'm being rude. I wanted to give you my experiences of dealing with this critical agenda in Leeds, and I've got quite a lot of detail on my slides, and I won't get through it all in 15 minutes. So if you find this interesting, you can come back and you can have a look at the slides at your leisure. So I'll go quite quickly through them. And the first one really just sets out a bit about Leeds. And the main thing to say here is that Leeds is the second largest planning authority, the second largest local authority outside of London. So we've got lots and lots of the big key issues in terms of delivery of large amounts of development for different sectors of the economy. Lots about twin speed economy, and also Leeds has a massive rural hinterland which distinguishes it from Birmingham and Manchester. So also lots about green infrastructure and rural planning as well. So why am I here? Well, Leeds declared a climate emergency like 80% of authorities in England back in 2019. The reasons for that declaration are around the fact that based on current usage of carbon within the Leeds economy at 4 million tonnes per annum, we're going to run out of our carbon budget, which we need to keep global temperature rise to less than 1.5 degrees. We're going to run out by 2028. So we need to do something about that. And we set out that we would seek to be carbon neutral by 2030. And we are working with Leeds University and other partners on something called a Leeds Climate Commission. And it's this commission which has produced this diagram here that shows quite simply and starkly that based on current carbon usage from 2000 to around 2018, we saw a 40% reduction in emissions, which we all thought was all right. But if we carry on with that trajectory, we're going to get nowhere near where we need to get to by 2030 to keep to within that 1.5 degree of warming. Excuse me. So what we need to do is improve on that 40% performance and actually get 80% better than we were in 2000. And the means of doing that and the role of the planning system in doing that should be very familiar to you. We need to reduce the emissions from homes, businesses, transport. We need to replace fossil fuels with clean, low carbon and renewable energy sources. And we need to draw carbon back from the atmosphere. Now, the good news is that working with Leeds University, we showed that we can get about 52% of the way there to 2030 pretty quickly by using currently available, feasible and viable technologies. That basically means that the upfront investment in terms of putting in kit into homes and changing the way we drive around and travel will get repaid throughout the life of the development. So it's a zero-sum option. Now, we're looking at this both from a planning perspective, but I just wanted to give you a bit of the wider council response And there's lots that's going on within Leeds City Council, trying to lead by example in terms of retrofitting council buildings, a lot of civic buildings and schools. The council's fortunate to have a council house building programme, and we're seeking to deliver those to low carbon standards. And we're also trying to generate a lot of our electricity that we use as a council from renewable and low carbon sources, as well as I'm sure many other local authorities are doing around massive tree planting schemes. But the one thing to get across here is that Leeds City Council, which is a Labour-run administration, has introduced climate change as to one of its three central pillars upon which all decisions are to be based. So every report that is written for the council, there is a section where we have to set out how we're addressing climate change, how we're addressing inclusive growth, which is about nobody getting left behind, and about how we're addressing health and well-being. And at the same time, doing lots of campaigning to get the right conditions nationally for change. Now, we've worked out in Leeds as well that across the 33 wards in our authority, there's a real spatial imbalance in terms of the climate vulnerability that hotter temperatures and wetter weather is going to produce. And this is quite a complicated graph, but what it shows is that the most sensitive wards to exposure from heat, flooding and air pollution are also those with the most limited capacity to deal with that, i.e. they don't have as much green infrastructure to act as a sponge to increase weather, and also to act as a combat to urban heating. And that's in the inner city and the city centre. So there's a clear city centre inner area against rural outer area dimension to the resilience within Leeds. And that's really interesting, because just in the news today, the Prime Minister was saying that he wants planning to deliver more and more housing on brownfield land. In Leeds, delivering more and more housing on brownfield land might not necessarily be the best in terms of its resilience to the climate changing. We've looked very closely within Leeds at the English planning system's role and how it can help address the path to net zero by 2030. And unfortunately, I would say it's made very difficult by current national government policy. And I think current policy is nowhere near explicit enough to give planning and planners the weight and the purpose that it needs to secure radical changes to the built environment and the way we have current planning policies. And I think that one of the reasons for that is because we've had a 10-year legacy of a fixation on housing land supply, delivery of housing numbers at any cost. And that's led to a failure in terms of considering other parts of the planning system, such as quality. And it's not just us that's saying that. The English Housing Survey recently revealed that 80% of new housing was deemed to be mediocre. And there's a report by the Grosvenor Company. If you Google Grosvenor Planning and Trust, you'll find an amazing statistic where basically 7% of people don't trust planners and planning departments to get the right quality of development. So what are we doing about that now? I'm going to buzz through these slides because I do want to spend a bit of time on my last slide. And you can come back to these at your leisure. We've started on a local plan update that's looking at 5 key areas. The first is around carbon reduction. We're looking at whole life carbon models, we're looking at low carbon buildings, and we're looking at energy generation, and we're looking to build on some existing good practice we already have in the city, not least the Leeds Pipes scheme, which is providing 2,000 homes and civic buildings with heat from our recycling facility. We're also looking at flood risk, updating our expectations about what flood risk means in Leeds, but also looking at flood storage measures within the main urban area, the role that green infrastructure can play in that, and also the role of new developments in terms of reducing runoff. We've got one of the largest whole catchment approaches to managing water and looking at flood resilience in Europe. And that's a part of the Leeds flood alleviation scheme, stretching from the uplands above Bradford, a neighbouring authority, where you can see there we've got trees being removed to allow for natural dams, right the way through to our flood alleviation scheme in the city centre of Leeds. We're also going to embed this through a focus on green infrastructure, because we think the green infrastructure side of things helps us deal with the nature emergency through biodiversity, but also the health and well-being side of things as well. So we're changing a lot of the way our urban spaces look. We're greening the city centre to make spaces more people-focused and child-friendly. And we're also seeking to embed biodiversity net gain through some of our plan making. And we're trying to bring all of this together, not just talking about carbon and climate change, we're talking about quality and placemaking. And today we've heard a lot about 20-minute neighbourhoods. We're grappling with that topic as well. And we're looking at the way that a 20-minute neighbourhood has to come with higher densities and also has to be supported by clear priorities for public transport. So we're working very closely with our Connecting Leeds strategy, which is our local transport plan. And the tagline for that plan is for Leeds to be a city where you don't need to own a car. And that's really exciting. And we're also looking at different examples of where housing is delivered differently and successfully. But in the meantime, we're looking at what we've got already in our plan, and we're training our members and our officers to heighten and increase those current policies that we've got that actually can be used more effectively and imaginatively to tackle these issues. And we're also looking at sustainable infrastructure as well, not just in terms of digital infrastructure, but also in terms of public transport and mass transit. Leeds is the largest city in Europe that doesn't have a mass transit system. So we're looking at ways in which that mass transit system, through the creation of transport hubs, can be used to support our 20-minute neighbourhoods. So just a wee bit of time on the key headlines from all of that. I think the main thing to get across is we've got a real ambition to do that, and we've got an elected member ambition. And why that's important is because our elected members are not just providing us with cover to explore this imaginatively and progressively within planning. They're also looking at sort of different ways of thinking about the status quo and about economic drivers. So we're looking at the moment at donor economics, Kate Raworth's work, and we're looking at circular economy ideas. And we're finding that in order for us to have progressive, more imaginative planning policies, you do need to take that step back and look at the macro picture as well. What we're also doing is we're really prepared to go for the 2030 target. But if we fail, know why we failed and how we failed, and work out what was within our circle of influence and what's not within our circle of influence. So we're really looking at, well, what's the role of the planning lever in all of this? And actually, what can we learn and what can we tell government in their ambitions to 2050? The need for training's been mentioned already today. I think that's not just for officers. I think that's for developers. I think it's for architects. I think it's for everybody within the industry, right the way back down the pipeline. I had a conversation with an architect last week when I said, why is your scheme so poor? And they said, well, you try fitting 200 homes into this space, as though that was the be all and end all of the development. Conversations with industry then are going to be critical to this. And my commitment through the local plan update is to really nail this viability issue. It looms over us and hangs over us like this threat that actually you can have whatever policies you want and as progressive as imaginative as you want, but actually if they're not viable, you can't do them. You don't pass go, they don't get applied. I want to have those conversations very early with the development industry. And I'm actually getting some really good responses from them on that. And one of them is about, well, look, we don't really mind what the policy says as long as it's applied consistently. Because what we don't want is we don't want to really go for this carbon agenda and this placemaking agenda and spend a lot of time and effort providing you with something that hits your policy boxes, but then find we're outbid on a piece of land by somebody who isn't doing that then succeeds in getting through the planning system. That's really important for us to understand how we can ensure that consistency through the local plan. Learning not only locally, but also regionally, and as I've said, providing messages back to national government. But just in the last few minutes, I just want to say one of the things that we're really working hard to do is to clarify the carbon literacy and the metrics of this. I think it's really important that we clarify what each development brings to this agenda. So monitoring and new ways of monitoring are going to be really important. It's not something we do a lot of, particularly in terms of the environmental side of planning. There's big gaps in terms of our monitoring in Leeds in terms of environmental benefits. But I think the conditions at the moment with biodiversity net gain, with natural capital ideas and ecosystem services ideas, coupled with the fact that we're doing this to hit a carbon budget, mean that we need to provide a very clear and unambiguous path between what a development is and how it counts towards Leeds' carbon budget. I think in all of this, what I find myself doing is working at the limits of national guidance, and we're lobbying heavily to the government through its planning white paper and its planning reforms in terms of how we feel that we can get development which is better able to deal with the climate emergency. But one of the things we are holding on to is that we've got the Climate Change Act, and the Climate Change Act obliges us to set a target for carbon setting and carbon saving and show how through our spatial strategy and our planning policies we can achieve that. Now that should, in theory, take precedence over planning guidance, and that's the approach we're taking at the moment, working with planning guidance, but having to work quite imaginatively and hard with it as it relates to those ambitions within the Climate Change Act. Bit of a run through in terms of what we're doing in Leeds then. You'll find information about the local plan update at this website address, and please do link in with me and ask me any questions on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to keep the conversation going.
Wow, that was quite a lot. And I know I'll be going back to some of those slides when the recordings come out. The infographics looked particularly interesting. So thanks very much for kicking us off, Martin. Without a pause for breath, we'll go to Jim Miller for the view from North Ayrshire. Jim.
We're up and running? Nope. Dear. There we go.
There you are. Yep.
just taking a wee while. Good afternoon, and my thanks to Craig and Barbara for the invitation to speak today. I think I've probably been to more Scottish RTPI conferences than Craig, but it's the first time I've been asked to speak at one, so I'm very grateful for that. I echo what Barbara said at the start. It'd be preferable to meet in person, but like Martin, I've got dreaded lurgy, so it's probably better that it's a virtual conference for us all and not spreading this cold around. My talk today is on planning for a green recovery and making it happen with the well-being in North Ayrshire. Oops, sorry, jumped ahead. Okay, so definition of well-being, as you can see there from the Oxford English Dictionary, taken with the new purpose of planning introduced in the Planning Act 2019. If we mash them together, we'd be looking at managing the development and use of land in the long-term public interest in a state of being comfortable, healthy or happy. Now, clearly as a strapline that doesn't hold water. In North Ayrshire, we make it much simpler. We are looking for a better life for our citizens. A better life in terms of their housing, a better life in terms of their employment, a better life in terms of their built and natural environment, and so many more aims to have a healthier, working, safer and thriving North Ayrshire. In this statement from the First Minister in 2020, the Scottish Government has a clear commitment to focusing on the broader well-being of the population, placing it at the very heart of the Government's economic strategy, giving equal importance to tackling inequality as economic competitiveness, and enabling the government to focus on a wider set of measures which reflects things like health and happiness of citizens. Whilst we await the production of the draft NPF4, it's clear from the position statement that net zero emissions and a wellbeing economy and resilient communities will all be at the heart of the focus of the NPF4 and therefore national strategy. Taking the time. So come back to our vision of a better life. We have aligned the LOIP with the LDP, with the council plan, with community wealth building, with the climate change emergency, all to provide a Green New Deal for the citizens of North Ayrshire. And some of that is underlined by the Ayrshire Growth Deal, which I'll speak more about in a moment or two. We've heard today from other speakers about the Green New Deal. What does that mean for North Ayrshire? A local Green New Deal presents an opportunity to develop a place-based approach for decarbonisation and achievement of net zero emissions, which builds upon the principles of community wealth building. Our strategic policy 4 aligns, as I said earlier, with the LOIP. Our overall vision for a healthier, working, safer and thriving North Ayrshire, as I said earlier, we will recognise and give due weight to proposals and address the priorities of our locality planning partnerships. It's the credit of my planning officers that these priorities feature in the justification of the determination of many applications that come before us. I'm hopefully whistling through these slides. It's also evident in our council plan. The vision for North Ayrshire is a fair for all council, which believes in fairness, tackles inequality and bases its decisions on these values. In 2020, the council, similar to Leeds, declared a climate emergency, and again similar to Leeds, seeking a net zero carbon emission by 2030. An ambitious programme, but built on an ethos of reducing carbon emissions through the council over many preceding years. The strategy will be delivered through 5 work streams: affordable warmth, a green economy, transport and travel, natural and built environment, and sustainable operations. One example of an active proposal is the delivery of 2 solar farms, which will see almost 2/3 of the council's energy needs provided through the council's own renewable energy production, reducing our emissions by over 850 tonnes per annum. Both of the sites that have been identified are on former landfill sites being repurposed for this use. A link to the climate strategy is available on this slide. I've given links within all these slides to the actual documents that I'm referencing. Similarly, I've added a link to the council's approved approach to economic recovery and renewal, which sets out how we will build back better, fairer and greener by using our economic levers across the council to develop a Green New Deal for North Ayrshire. In particular, maximising renewable energy, a green jobs fund, investing in a commercial estate to improve its sustainability of assets, tackling vacant and derelict land and building in our town centres, implementing community wealth building and supporting our carbon absorption work by investing in tree planting. We're committed to planting some 500,000 trees over the preceding years, and specifically supporting asset-based community economic development. The Ayrshire Growth Deal, in partnership with our neighbouring authorities at East and South Ayrshire, is seen as a significant game changer to deliver these priorities. 2 of the Ayrshire Growth Deal projects are at Ardrossan and Irvine. At Ardrossan, addressing a significant area of derelict and contaminated land, which has been vacant since its last use as an oil storage area in the 1980s. It seems appropriate that we are transforming an oil storage area into beneficial community use for our citizens. Some £170 million will be investment to deliver an educational campus aligned with the International Marine Science and Environment, connections to the town centre, a new marina extension, and delivery of an extensive area of housing, in addition to works to improve the harbour terminal, creating opportunities for local wealth generation, learning, skills development, sustainable resilient place, coastal and marine access, and destination development. A further project is at what we call the Great Harbour, along the estuary of the River Irvine at its confluence with the River Garnock. It will build on the tourism potential for the waterfront, catalysing programmes and investment, building on our tourism offer and the existing maritime hub and museum. Martin talked about the flood alleviation strategy for Leeds. This area is subject to a similar proposal. The Upper Garnock Valley flood alleviation scheme is well underway and will give great relief to various communities along its length. This slide clearly demonstrates why we're doing this in terms of making a better life for our citizens. Health challenges within North Ayrshire are evidenced by these statistics on life expectancy, a difference of 14 years from two of our towns for male life expectancy, and even more staggering, a difference of 14 years for two areas within the same town of Irvine. We also have extensive deprivation, the SMID for North Ayrshire, fifth most deprived council area in Scotland, with 52 of its 186 data zones in the 15% most deprived in Scotland. We also have high levels of unemployment, currently 5.8%, compared to the Scottish average of 4.6%. In May 2020, North Ayrshire became the first in Scotland to adopt a wealth building strategy with the aim of creating a fairer local economy. Last week, our Cabinet considered the annual report and the key successes over the last 12 months over the 55 actions arising from the strategy. Again, a link is available on this slide to the annual report. We heard earlier from the speakers on the 5 pillars of community wealth building. Of the 55 actions that we've identified in the strategy, probably most applicable to planners are the land and assets. We have undertaken an initial review of our commercial property to deliver sustainable assets, the approval of our regeneration delivery plan in relation to town centre regeneration. We've undertaken further studies on our vacant and derelict land, and a place-based investment in the repurposing of council assets, particularly at Millport Town Hall and also Stephenson Beach Club, both community asset transfers. We're also repurposing town centre properties to encourage town centre living, and the continued progress close to Scotland's first simplified planning zone, which is making substantial change to our housing delivery. In closing, the vision of a Green New Deal, fair for all and a better life for the citizens can only be delivered by working cross-service and with external partners. This last slide shows some of those cross-service actions, including localism, supporting communities to make best use of our land and assets, community food system, our regeneration delivery plan, again I've got a link to that, a green health partnership with our health and social care partnerships, increasing funding for outdoor learning, a greater emphasis on schools to use outdoors, and many, many more. Thank you for this whistle-stop tour of the actions that we're undertaking within North Ayrshire to delivering well-being and a green recovery within our area. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jim, and well done you for struggling through what's clearly becoming quite a heavy cold. We'll ask you to hang around just a little bit longer. Our final speaker in this particular session is Debbie Mackay, Director of Planning at Savills. So we'll get the private sector's perspective. Debbie. Oh dear, I'm not sure about others, but I'm not hearing you. Nope. I'm hearing something now. Now, Pam had this problem fixed from Jane. Do we know how to fix this? Okay, bear with us just a wee minute, folks. We're trying to solve the problem in the background. So I think we've asked our presenter to try switching everything off and switching it on again. So that sometimes works. There's always something, and this definitely wouldn't happen if we were in a face-to-face event. Although if we were trying to stream it, it might still fail for people who are watching at home. So I'm hearing some noise in the background. Is that you, Debbie? Oh, fantastic. Yes, I can hear you. I was afraid I was going to have to keep waffling. Debbie, take us away.
in Argyll and Bute, and then I've spent some time in East Lothian and in Stirlingshire living in these areas. So I've experienced remote rural and accessible rural in a number of locations, and have learned quite a lot living and working there, living and relaxing there too. So I'm also privileged to be a director on the board of Rural Housing Scotland, which is a charity which supports communities to develop affordable rural housing. And hearing from the staff and the members of the Rural Housing Scotland has given me some very stark insights into what rural homelessness looks like, and also the incredible and exciting innovations that are happening across Scotland in community provision of affordable housing in rural areas. I'd like to just draw your attention to the Rural Housing Scotland website, which is fantastic resources, but it is really worth looking at the series of short videos they have on rural homes, rural lives, just to hear firsthand the experiences of people trying to find homes in parts of rural Scotland. I also sit on the National Policy Board of Scottish Land and Estates, and in case you think I'm just looking for a new job or something, it's really just to illustrate that where rural is concerned, I've got hopefully a fairly rounded view from a number of different perspectives. It's also from the kind of landowning and land managing community, as well as community experience as well. And over the last 2 years, I've been involved in two research studies, one for Scottish Government on rural planning policy to 2050 to inform NPF4, and another for Scottish Land Commission on the role of land in enabling new housing supply in rural Scotland. So both of these have really added to my experience of understanding what's going on more widely in rural Scotland and planning's role in that. So I'll just mention a few important facts to bear in mind about rural Scotland, which is easy to forget, is the total landmass of Scotland is approximately 7.8 million hectares. The graph above shows that although rural Scotland accounts for 17% of the total population in Scotland, it accounts for 98% of the landmass. So this reflects the dispersed nature of the population in rural areas. In contrast, the rest of Scotland accounts for 83% of the population, but only 2% of the landmass. And I really hope my maths are correct there. In contrast, the value of the rural economy in 2015 was 34.6 billion, comparable to that of Edinburgh and Glasgow combined at 38 billion. So the rural economy counts for 27% of Scotland's overall economy, but just 17% or 1/5 of its population. The National Council for Rural Advisors report in 2018 made some very telling statements, one of which was, with an abundance of natural capital, world-renowned heritage and vibrant, diverse communities, our rural economy is not just crucial to Scotland's national brand, it's crucial to our national prosperity. However, national policy making processes do not always effectively represent rural interests and have not always delivered the best economic outcomes for Scotland. So we will return a little bit to that later in my talk. Very difficult slide to see here, I'm sorry, but it's just worth noting that rural Scotland, according to Scottish Government key facts, does in many ways provide a very high quality of life, which I can certainly testify to in places that I've lived. This graph shows a higher proportion of people who live in remote rural areas feel very strongly that they belong to their immediate neighbourhood than either people in accessible rural areas or the rest of Scotland. So that speaks to the kind of community feeling of living in rural areas. And then this slide, again hard to see, shows that 97% of people, residents of rural areas, rate their neighbourhood as very good or fairly good place to live, and that compares to 94% in the rest of Scotland. And if further evidence were required, this table, hard to read it speedily, but it basically shows that the frequency of visits made to the outdoors is not unexpectedly higher in remote rural areas. But possibly of most relevance to today is the sheer scale of natural capital which Scotland has to offer and how that natural capital contributes to our green recovery. Given time restrictions, I'll really just mention the one. 20% of Scotland is covered in peat, which is, in terms of carbon capture, is pretty much our equivalent of rainforests. So many communities, landowners, occupiers and managers are intent on developing long-term environmental strategies which realise the potential of these natural assets, and this is expected to drive a significant need for new recruits and skills in rural sectors. For example, the Institute of Chartered Foresters recently forecast that if we're to reach the targets for tree planting across Scotland, we'll need to increase the workforce involved in all aspects of woodland management by 29% over the next 10 years. This kind of new activity could support the repopulation drive for rural Scotland set out in the Planning Act 2019 and in the emerging NPF. And at a political level, the significant announcement recently of the cooperation agreement between the Scottish Government and the Scottish Green Party appears to herald significant increase in pace around responding to climate change and creating a successful just transition to a decarbonised economy for Scotland by 2045. And obviously Liberal mention of the wellbeing economy, which has come up a lot today. And some of their top policy frameworks coming out of the cooperation agreement illustrate the significant role that rural areas have to play. The Good Food Nation aspirations, rural repopulation, the Natural Environment Bill and the Nature Restoration Fund, to name a few. All of these programmes require Rural Scotland to be performing at its optimum across the board. So let's now look at how planning and these national government objectives and the opportunities rural areas offer all converge. As you'll no doubt know, the 2019 Planning Act introduced 6 new outcomes required of NPF4 as listed on the slide. And I've highlighted 2 which I'll use to demonstrate the need for careful development and application of planning policy to make sure we don't risk these objectives clashing with each other. So turning to rural repopulation first, this is clearly a major theme driven by the real concerns over significant trends in rural depopulation, highlighted to a large degree in work by the James Hutton Institute. So local authorities are now required to consider in their local development plans the desirability of allocating land for the purposes of resettlement and the extent to which there are rural areas within the district in relation to which there's been a substantial decline in population. So on the face of it, this is a very welcome element in a planning document, as it should require local planning authorities to give much greater emphasis to rural development friendly policies. I think it's important to point out that there are areas that will need careful nuancing and robust rural proofing if they're not to act against the repopulation outcome. So I'll use one example from the position paper to illustrate my point. The position paper on NPF4 sets out clearly that the long-term strategy will be driven by the overarching goal of addressing climate change. And clearly tackling climate change is the greatest challenge of our time, and it's essential that the planning process plays its part in that fully. I've sought in this presentation to illustrate the vital role that rural Scotland will play in this area. However, it's the translation of that goal into policy and action that is where rural areas could be disadvantaged. One of the key statements in the document relating to net zero emissions says our future places will be planned in a way that reduces the need to travel and builds in natural solutions. And the report goes on to state that we'll seek to promote high quality walking, wheeling, cycling environments, public transport and shared transport options in preference to single occupancy private car use. And it goes on to talk about directing development to locations which reduce the need to travel and are already well served by sustainable transport options. And these are utterly laudable, logical aims, and taken in a central belt or urban, peri-urban context are completely understandable, inarguable, but they could create some real challenges to the aim of repopulation of rural Scotland and supporting rural Scotland in general terms. So for many decades, the standard approach to planning for the countryside has been to focus development on places which already have public transport and other services. And given that much of rural Scotland has been suffering from depopulation and reduction in services, I would argue that this approach, applied without nuance to rural planning policies, has already been counterproductive to sustaining and indeed growing rural populations. In relation to this specific subject of sustainable transport, significant trends in travel and working styles, such as electric cars, improvements in rural IT infrastructure and home working, are already creating new opportunities to increase the sustainability of rural living and even delivery of rural services. The production of NPF4 is a huge opportunity to provide planning practitioners with a fresh and inspirational agenda for the repopulation of rural Scotland. And my main recommendation would be that rural proofing of NPF4 should be the absolute minimum response. Instead, I do believe that 98% of the Scottish landmass deserves its own specific visionary treatment, creating a complementary role to that of urban Scotland. As NPF4 comes forward, it must provide the rural dimension to such policies and give local planning authorities strategic policy support to meaningfully plan for rural repopulation. I was involved in these 2 studies, and both of them lauded very particularly the need for locally defined solutions in rural areas, and the mechanism of local place plans was widely seen as a significant tool in making this happen. We looked at a case study in Applecross, one of the most remote areas in Scotland, with dispersed township communities living beside and within a large single ownership and in significant need of housing. But through a collaborative process engaging the community, landowner, planning authority and public agencies, Planning PAS or Planning in Scotland assisted the partners to develop a community land use plan. The plan enabled a scale of detailed planning which would be impossible for the planning authority to do alone, and it resulted, in my opinion, in a very rural appropriate response to land use planning. I'll just skip the next slide. But some examples, it explored woodland crofts, for instance, but it developed a settlement pattern which may not look like a conventional urban or even accessible urban rural area form, but it respects the unique landform and known local conditions to produce its own version near the core village of a 20-minute neighbourhood. It also, in my earlier slide, dealt with the wider rural hinterland and brought out opportunities for sympathetic development more strategically to deal with the more scattered townships and settlement pattern typical of this part of rural Scotland. So I personally think this use of LPPs is very much the way ahead for rural areas, but resourcing will be the major challenge in delivering this. I am wrapping up, but overall I consider our understanding of what sustainable planning for rural areas really looks like is inadequate. I think as a profession we need to dig deeper, look harder, and I'm really delighted that the RTPI have just appointed a consortium to look at this piece of work, reviewing future challenges to rural planning across the UK and Ireland. I think that's going to be hugely important and influential, and our own Scottish RTPI have produced this position paper, position paper on rural planning. And while there's some points Robbie and I have argued about over it, I think it's really timely and important to have this discussion and for the RTPI to be really engaged in it. So very pleased to see that. So in conclusion, I'd like to sum up our challenges planners in all of Scotland as under two phrases, which are facetious. Please don't take them too seriously, but hopefully they are memorable and can challenge us to think about how we think about all of Scotland. First of all, I believe we need to green up our people spaces, and then we need to people our green spaces. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much for that, Debbie. From one South Armagh Northern Ireland to another. Yes, it's not deliberate, folks, honest. But I love that, and I love the idea of rural proofing NPF4 as well. So if I could ask our participants, Martin, Jim, and Debbie, all to put on their cameras and join me. We've actually got time for some questions, so please, folk, do send them in. What I'd like to do, though, is to go back to a question from Stephen Gray, who may well have lost the will to live in terms of this one being answered, because he asked it at 10:25 this morning in anticipation of things happening. And it's actually around something that Jim and Martin touched on, but will affect rural communities as well. And it's how we address concerns that have been expressed already by the Scottish Environment Protection Agency around balancing water shortages at part of the year and stormwater peak flows in particularly in heavily built up urban areas. But we see it every year. You know, the rest and be thankful gets obliterated several times a year. So it is actually one of those things that we've got to plan for. So how can we do that within our local development plans and the planning system more broadly? Martin, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, thanks. It's really important, and I think it's, if we shift why we're planning from in order to deliver economic growth and numbers of homes, to how are we changing our environment and how can we do that better, then I think you start to then unlock different answers to planning questions. So I think one of the things we need to do is work far more closely with infrastructure providers. So our Yorkshire Water, in my case, in terms of their investment plans, we used to have really good structured discussions with infrastructure providers at a regional level when England had 8 regional plans. Now we've got 350 different local authorities trying to do the same thing, with hard-pressed agencies who are also trying to deliver. It makes the situation far more difficult. So communication with infrastructure providers, their investment plans, but also with landowners as well. Things that are around land management that don't require planning permission. Planners often think that they can only get involved in things that require planning permission, whereas how landowners who have the opportunity to manage water in better ways also play a key role in this.
Thanks very much. Jim, your experience of, well, I suppose it's something maybe that we didn't think so much of in the past, that thinking about the two extremes, a lot on flooding, but maybe not so much on shortages.
Yeah, I think I echo what Martin was saying, but maybe an observation on that is it requires a wider strategic view. Now, if you think of river catchment areas, the rivers that come into our area don't just start in North Ayrshire. So looking at that nationally, and we are a small country. I think Debbie was trying to make that, albeit we're heavily rural. We are a small country, and surely we can bring our thinking around how we address that supply and also the flooding issues that we have. Sorry, I'm really breaking up here. What we're dealing with in what we can deal with in North Ayrshire, and our evidence that earlier, the Upper Garnock study has shown that it is deliverable. Now we can control flooding within the required catchment areas, but what we have to avoid at all costs is developing on floodplains. And we still see evidence every time switch on the news and there's flooding somewhere, it's through development on floodplains. And after, dare I say, 40 years in the profession, I'm staggered that is still allowed. It still can happen.
And of course, thinking strategically, as Jim rightly says, in our urban areas, the issue doesn't start there. It will start in a broader context. So engaging that conversation beyond the urban area and into the rural, it would be important as well. Yes, Debbie?
Yeah, agreed. My thought exactly is around regional land use planning. And again, it comes back to our role as planners isn't just about what we do in the planning system. It is that kind of leadership and partnership role where we bring a lot of knowledge and experience and to the table to help with these partnership arrangements, which again, landowners are hugely involved in and can contribute massively to. And under all the work being done on natural capital and the investment coming into that, I think we've got a huge opportunity for these two things to start knitting together really well.
I think there was also a good study done in the Borders some while ago, looking at community woodland planting, taking some of the water out of the catchment area. There is evidence out there of good practice. It is clearly not all negative.
Some of this is around much greater long-term thinking. You plant a tree today, it won't do an awful lot for quite a few years. And obviously that's just one example. So some of this is around what others have already said in relation to the politics of our system and having a longer term view, thinking for future generations. How have you managed those conversations? You talked about Martin, about engaging your members in that. Presumably, well, I think we would all agree that that's critical, and we've all worked in scenarios where perhaps short-term expediency has been part of the issue. But how did you turn that around?
To be fair to our members, they declared the climate emergency without consulting us. So we were playing catch up in terms of what our plan could do for the climate emergency, despite the fact that we've been chuntering for years about the system in England and how it was broken and focused only on delivering housing numbers rather than this wider quality. So what we've done is we've used that as an opportunity to pull a lot of things together. So that climate emergency is expressly about getting to carbon neutral. But as I said in the presentation, it's also about the health and wellbeing challenge, the nature challenge, and actually just the sheer quality of development. And people are just fed up with crap. And the sort of the understanding that actually, if we want to get over the constant objection to much needed homes, to deliver homes, especially affordable homes, we want to get over the objection to that. We need to make them better. We need to make them a better quality, and we need to show that we're actually creating places rather than just delivering boxes. So I'm not sure whether that answered your question, but that was a shared officer and member view. So it's been relatively straightforward for us to get that through.
You are obviously pushing at an open door, so well done your electorate for voting in such forward-thinking people. And Jim, you talked about your staff actually referencing the things that are in other strategies. That I mean, one of the criticisms perhaps in the past is that the various professions have been a little bit siloed and said, well, that's got nothing to do with me, I do this bit. And you know, is that strapline a better life helping with that and helping make sure that things get through members as well?
We were very fortunate that the LOIP was in advance of our last iteration of the LDP. So it was easy for us to align the LDP policies and strategic policies with the aims and ambitions of the LOIP. So much so that, as I showed in one of the earlier slides, that we actually have the priorities embedded in the LDP, the LOIP priorities, so that they can be referenced by officers in the determination of applications. And it really is encouraging to say that the officers are looking at that as part and parcel of the LDP. So the community priorities are referenced within our decision making. I'd also echo Martin's point. It was our council leader who brought community wealth building strategy to the council. It was the leadership that decided that we should have a 2030 zero target. That was all pushing at an open door, I think you said, Barbara. But it's very encouraging when you've enlightened members like that. And hopefully they're listening.
And Debbie, you referenced sort of the more grassroots approach to the local place plans and the opportunities that they present. Clearly, where you've got a local community that's taking a lead, it's a rare politician that ignores that. So do you actually see the further use of things like local place plans and community originated work as being something that that supports a rural agenda?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's picturing how best to do it. In the instance of Applecross, that Highland Council were really to be commended on their approach, just quite honestly saying we don't have the scale to draw up allocations for every small settlement in Highland. Totally fair enough. But communities come forward, or landowners or groups of partners come forward to do that, we'll support them. And Highland Council were commended by the community there for their support and participation in the whole process of developing the community land use plan. And I think that's what's really interesting about that is you just get that nuance where, in a lot of parts of rural Scotland, you just can't build in the nice logical place right next to where there are houses already, because you've got potentially rock and bog in the way, quite literally. So you really need to think much more rural, refined about it. And I think local place plans are a really good place to do that. I think that collaborative planning approach is really good as well. And one point I was going to make about the long-term planning, what's really interesting about the natural capital agenda is what we're seeing now is landowners of all sorts, including community landowners, are now really taking 200-year views on their land, which is amazing to think about that. But that's the way you have to think when you're thinking of managing a large ecosystem like this and thinking of planting that far ahead. And to me, that's really exciting that so many of us are heading in that direction of seriously long-term thinking about our country. And we need to get those decisions right at this stage, because they could have an impact for 200 years. But hopefully, because of the investment in natural capital, we're really going to see that.
So what is it that we need from government to support all of this work? And I suppose I would include national UK government as well as Scottish government, because whilst we're talking about the planning as a devolved matter, there's all sorts of issues that affect what we can deliver on the ground. Martin, I'll start with you with a broader perspective than us Scots.
So, I think government can afford to be clear that one of the key purposes of planning is to reduce and tackle carbon emissions and make places more resilient to deal with the effects of climate change. I really think that would help a lot, because it would help balance against inappropriate development that is really focused just on delivering housing numbers. I think the second thing for us in terms of the National Planning Policy Framework is we need a clear test of soundness, that local authorities need to be meeting a carbon target and showing how their spatial strategies contribute toward that.
Nice and clear cut, thanks. Jim, obviously we've got MPF4 and SPP coming, so what would you like to see from Scottish Government to help us achieve all that we're talking about today?
I think it's encouraging what we've heard so far. Maybe the snippets we got from the Minister this morning, but also the position statement that came out is clearly moving in a direction that we all want to see. But to make that happen, it has to be resourced. And not to labour the point, if we don't have the infrastructure to back up those goals and aims of the new MPF, then it ain't going to happen. But we hopefully have a positive, it ain't on a positive note, but hopefully it is going to be positive. It's going to be backed up by the infrastructure commitments from the Scottish Government as well. And that can flow through to the LDPs, which will all come from the new arrangements for local development plans.
And Debbie, you talked about obviously for Applecross, that was a kind of a one-off with resources found from elsewhere, using organisations like PAS. What would you like to see Scottish Government doing to make more of that happen?
Sorry, boring old answer, but it's more resources really. And I suppose we have, I think it's been mentioned today, is the hope that the 10-year plan cycle will free up planners. I really hope this happens, to be more driving forward of the plans themselves and being able to support communities to do their own plans, but also skilling up of communities to do it, and skilling up of the professional sector, so to speak, to support them to do that. And just, yeah, I think generally we probably need our whole population to just get better at planning and understanding planning, which possibly drives us to doing more around school work, which again, RTPI, at school level and at university level, to be really encouraging people to think about their areas and how they can influence their areas positively. And I think we do have to do on people understanding that homes are a good thing, but obviously how they're being delivered has not really helped convince people that a lot of building of homes is good, but actually we need homes and they are good and we all live in one. So having people to understand that is a really important part of our planning system, but it's the how we do that and all of that's got to be really carefully nuanced.
It takes us back to a point that Pam Ewan made in the last session about planning is a great profession. We should be shouting from the rooftops and we should be encouraging everybody to participate. And although be careful what you wish for, because if we've got a population of planners, then there's no hiding for us. But thanks very much, everybody. A huge amount of information in your presentations, which is just fantastic. So I'm sure people will go back to the recordings and look at them in more detail when they have time. And thanks for all the links and the very positive news around what's actually happening right across the British Isles, which is really encouraging to hear. So thanks very much to Martin, Jim and Debbie.
Thank you very much, Barbara.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we're just going to move on now to the final summing up for the event today. Before I move to Victoria, I just want to remind everybody of all the effort that goes into creating an event like this. I've described myself, don't laugh, as the beautiful swan floating along the top, because underneath there's all the legs going like Billy-O, because it takes a huge effort to arrange events like this, to keep it going, and to work through some of the technical challenges that we've had. So particular thanks before we move to our closing remarks from Victoria for Craig, Annette and Jenny at RTPI. They do a huge amount of work over the course of the year, but particularly to make events like this happen. And again, to thank our sponsors, Capita and Tetra Tech. And to all of our speakers and all of those of you who have participated across the course of today, it's been great. My brain hurts, but in a good way. So I'll just ask the Chief Executive of RTPI nationally, Victoria Hills, to sum up and give us our closing remarks for the day. Victoria. Are you there? Oh dear, do I need to keep waffling? Maybe. I am a minute early. It's an occupational hazard. Here we go. Victoria, thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Barbara. I was here. It all worked swimmingly in the test, but you know, these are live events.
Yes, exactly.
We know this is not a pre-record. I'm not an algorithm or a hologram. I'm genuinely here. Sadly, I'm not with you all in Scotland, but thank you very much for inviting me to say a few closing words here. And there are, I can see many attendees still here that you've made it to the rest of the day. I'm sorry I haven't been able to join you for the whole day, but I know it's been very interesting, very thought-provoking. I'm sure that there are people joining not just from Scotland, but across the nation, seeing lots of similar themes here that we can all learn, bringing together a range of perspectives, exploring the ideas of green recovery, looking at what green economy should be, should compromise, what's needed to deliver it. And of course, this event today is a key lead-up event, if you like, to the RTPI's COP26 programme of activity aiming to highlight the really important role that planning and planners can play in tackling climate change and achieving net zero targets. But we also hope that it will help inform the forthcoming draft national planning framework, which is due to be published in Scotland in the coming weeks. Just on that framework, I think it's fair to say it provides a major opportunity, a fantastic opportunity for planning and planners to show the contribution that the profession can make and is making to tackling climate change and achieving net zero targets. As we heard from the Minister, the draft NPF will be published soon. This soon is a word that we're very familiar with down south in Whitehall with regard to English planning reforms, but let's hope your soon is a bit sooner than our soon. For those of you in the know, you'll know what I'm alluding to there. But you know, having this opportunity to engage in debate, it was very heartening to be able to hear the Minister say that planning does have the opportunity to tackle climate and nature emergencies. And also, you know, real aim there to help deliver 20-minute neighbourhoods. And at the RTPI, we've already outlined a number of key challenges that will be needed to be tackled and taken into account. NPF4 should, I think we're all very convinced, prioritise climate action, but it also should be about tackling health inequalities in the context of delivering net zero, promoting sustainable travel. Many of us who've worked in planning have seen this opportunity for years, but it just so happens that it takes a pandemic to really crystallise that opportunity, that it's not just about saving the planet, it's also saving our health, if you like, and being able to embed and provide opportunities for more sustainable travel, and being able to do that through the business of placemaking is something that makes a whole lot of sense. We would also like to see the NPF promote decision-making based around the well-being of future generations, where planning decisions provide long-term positive impacts to prevent persistent problems in some of those health inequalities and poverty, as well as climate change. I think, just as an aside, 2021 is the year really that for those who weren't in the business of the built environment and studying it and working in it, the broader public have actually had an awakening this year that climate change isn't something that's happening in the future, it's happening now. And as a profession, there is an opportunity for us to really crystallise our part in addressing how we respond to that change and how we actually respond to the needs for mitigation now. And we should be pushing an open door with ministers on that, because, as I say, I think, you know, if the message wasn't clear before, it certainly got a lot clearer this year. 2021 is the year when I think everybody realises that they can see those devastating consequences, not just in far-flung parts of the world, but a lot closer to home. COP26, which I mentioned earlier, is literally just around the corner. It's days away now. What a fabulous opportunity for Scotland and RTPI Scotland to be helping the UK to showcase the great work that we know we can do as a planning profession and have been doing, but really understanding that role of planners in helping to tackle climate change across each of the 4 UK governments. And I think that at the RTPI, we have made a pitch to be inside the green zone with an event. Like many, we weren't successful for that, but we are going to be holding that event as a fringe outside, and we'll be able to say more on that as we get a bit nearer. But the RTPI presidential team will be in Glasgow for part of the summit to push our case and engage with stakeholders. I think for those of us who have been involved in attending party conferences recently, we know that there is nothing better than actually being able to go up and have a face-to-face quick meet and greet with ministers and policymakers and movers and shakers in this arena. And so the opportunity for us to showcase the profession up in COP26 is too good an opportunity to miss. We are, of course, trying to create a real sense of energy and excitement in the lead up to this. In addition to showcasing events such as today, we have launched a web hub that will provide all the details of our events and make it very accessible for members to be able to join in the knowledge sharing and the broader exchange of information, ideas, practice and policy, not just across the UK, but of course across the world, as we look to involve some of our sister institutes in our own fringe event, but also in the broader conversations. But of course, the success of COP26 is not necessarily going to be exactly what happens during the summit. It's, of course, the legacy that comes out of that. And we want to be putting our best foot forward as a profession to show we're not just a talking shop, we're actually the people who can help make it happen through a strong planning framework and through day-to-day planning and working across the broader built environment profession. Now, resources was just mentioned on the last panel. Yes, this seems to be a perennial challenge or opportunity across the nations. And I know that the planning profession stands ready to do what it can do to support making the case for resourcing. This is not an issue that's unique to Scottish planning departments, as I say, but nevertheless, a steep decline in resourcing for Scottish planning authorities over the last decade has left the profession in a challenging, some may say precarious position in some areas. And our research has shown that, recent research we published has shown that the gross expenditure on planning departments has been cut in some areas in real terms by up to 42%. This just can't be right when you think the important role that planning and placemaking has to take in addressing some of those big challenges that I've mentioned. But actually, let's face it, in delivering any local authority's corporate strategy or vision, it's most of it is about placemaking and joining the dots across it. So I think there is, although I think, as one of the last speakers said, yes, it's resourcing again, but there is a real responsibility on all of us to keep making the case for that resourcing, because it's not just about bums on seats. It's actually about making real impact and influencing outcomes of placemaking, so that we can deliver on the ambitions for net zero, health inequalities, and providing everyone with a decent place to live, play and work, for leisure, as well as all of the other things that we've talked about. So given this, I think we were all pleased perhaps to hear the Minister say that he does see resourcing as an immediate priority, and that the government will soon be taking forward work to help the implementation of statutory chief planning officers in every local authority. And I should say, on a personal note, certainly putting my English planning hat on here, we do look to Scotland as an exemplar, and we are holding you up as an exemplar in our conversations with the Department of now local levelling up and communities and housing, just been recently named in England, to say, why wouldn't we want a statutory planning officer in English authorities also? So, it's with the great work that Craig and the team have done to make that case over the years, along with the Scottish Exec and the various conveners over the years, you've made real traction there. And I think the legacy of that piece is we'd like to see that wash through across the other nations. So in conclusion, in his speech earlier, the Minister talked about the need to move away from conflict towards collaboration. And I think this is something we all recognise. We would like more collaboration and less conflict. And I think today's conference has really shown just how important it is to bring people together across different backgrounds, different professional backgrounds, different perspectives, and to discuss common goals and ways forward, and to broaden that conversation out. There is a very important part to play for the Institute here in using its convening role in bringing people together and organisations together. And I like to think we're less about conflict and more about collaboration. So you've provided much food for thought today in how we take these ambitions forward. We will, of course, be feeding all of your great ideas and contributions into our own work and our work programmes going forward. So in addition to all the thank yous made just a while ago from Barbara, it's also thank you for your contributions. We've already thanked our sponsors, but I've got a note here to remind myself to thank Capita again for their support in helping make this conference happen. And I'll just reiterate a personal thanks to the team there who have made all of this happen through what I hope you agree is a really excellent conference platform, as well as a conference programme. And I'm sure that this will not only help all of you living and working in Scotland, but will be of great help and a source of learning and best practice for other colleagues and interested parties who are watching this from around the world. So thank you very much for letting me close today. Congratulations everyone on a fabulous day. And at this point, I'm going to hand back to Barbara. Thank you, Barbara.
Thanks very much, Victoria. Really good summing up of the day and that important message around bringing different perspectives together to collaborate. If that isn't a basic definition of what planning and planners are, then I don't know what is. I hope you all got something from today. I'll remind you that there will be recordings available, so the bits that you missed, you can watch again and catch up with, and pause the slides that people went too fast over so that you can see the details on them, and they'll come out from the RTPI team shortly. Please do share those with your networks as well. It's not exclusive. We want everybody to benefit from the learning from this event. Thanks very much for sticking with us to the end if you did. And I hope to see you all in person next year when the event will be hosted by Andrew Trigger in a venue yet to be confirmed. Thanks all and cheerio.